Let's try something for a second. Think about the last 5 businesses you've interacted with this week. Not ones you sought out specifically, ones you encountered spontaneously, through an ad, a social media post, a website you landed on, or a recommendation from a friend. How many of them do you actually remember? Not in the sense of recognizing the name if you heard it again, but actually remember, with some clear sense of what they did and why they were different from everyone else doing the same thing. Most people usually only come up with 1, maybe 2 examples. And an interesting point about the ones you remember isn't because they were the best, cheapest, or the most established. It's because there's something about them that was specific enough to leave a mark. Today I want to talk about why that happens. Because it's not random and it's not luck. There's a very specific psychology behind what gets remembered and what disappears. And once you understand it, you can never look at your own business positioning the same way again. Most businesses approach the question of being memorable as a design problem. A better logo, a more consistent design, a more active social media presence. But the thing that most branding approaches skip is that you can have all these things and still be completely forgettable. Because none of these things address the actual mechanism behind what the human brain chooses to retain. At its most fundamental level, being memorable is not about being polished. It's about being distinct. Not in a loud or aggressive way. Not in the sense of doing something bizarre or attention-grabbing for its own sake. But in a sense of being genuinely different from the surrounding context, in a way that the brain has no choice but to notice and file separately. That's how memory actually works. Not by storing everything equally, but by flagging what breaks the pattern and letting everything else fade away. Most businesses aren't forgettable because they're bad. They're forgettable because they get lost in everything else around it. In 1933, a German psychiatrist named Hedwig von Restorff conducted a series of experiments that produced one of the most replicated findings in memory research. Her basic experiment was simple. She gave participants different lists of items to memorize. Most of the items were similar, like a series of numbers or a series of words. But one item in each list was always special, like a word among numbers, a color among black and white text, or an image among letters. The findings were unambiguous and has been replicated hundreds of times since. Most people remember the special items almost immediately, while the similar items blurred together and faded away. The distinct ones remained within memory. This became known as the von Restorff effect, or more broadly, the isolation effect. It's a psychological principle that items which stand out from their surrounding context are significantly more likely to be committed to memory than those that blend in. Now let's apply this to a crowded market. Imagine your potential customer or client scrolling through 10 different service providers from your industry. They see the same general language, the same implied promises, same professional headshots, and the same claims about quality and customer service. The brain processes that list, the way it processed von Restorff's similar items, as a pattern. And patterns don't get remembered individually. They get compressed into a general impression and filed away as just another one of many. The one provider that breaks the pattern, that says something specific, that positions itself differently, that has a point of view that doesn't sound like everyone else, that's the word among the list of numbers. That's the one that actually gets remembered. I think about this constantly in relation to my own positioning. When I first started building RA Works, I did what most new founders do. I looked at what established players in the tech space looked like, the language they used, the services they offered, and the way they described their value. And without really realizing it at the time, I started building something that rhymed with all of that. The same general claims, implied promises, and a professional tone. I was just another number among a list of numbers. Competent, credible, but completely forgettable. The shift happened when I stopped trying to look like what I thought an agency was supposed to look like and started leading with what was actually specific about me. Several years in education, a background in making complex things accessible to people who don't want to be confused. A consultancy operating from Japan serving clients in California with a methodology shaped as much by a classroom as by a terminal. That combination, as far as I know, doesn't exist anywhere else. And the moment I started leading with it instead of hiding from it was when I finally started noticing responses from the kind of people I was reaching out to all along. Not because I got better at what I do, but because I became a word among a list of numbers. Here's a question we're thinking about more deeply. If being distinct is so clearly more effective than being generic, if the von Restorff effect has been replicated consistently for nearly a century, why do so many businesses default to positioning that makes them no different from their competitors? The honest answer is that generic feels safer. And in a psychological sense, it is safer. When you look like everyone else in your space, you're protected by the anonymity of the pattern. Nobody signals you out for criticism because there's nothing specific enough to criticize. Nobody evaluates you too closely because there's nothing distinctive enough to warrant a closer examination. You exist in the comfort of the middle of the list, where you're neither remembered nor particularly noticed. Distinctiveness removes that protection. When you say something specific, you can be specifically agreed with or specifically disagreed with. When you position yourself in a genuinely particular way, you attract some people strongly and repel others clearly. When you break the pattern, you become visible. And visibility is a form of vulnerability that not everyone is ready for. This connects directly to something that we explored earlier in the first video of the series. The false self, Winnicott's performed version of who we are, prefers the safety of resemblance. It would rather blend into the surrounding context than risk the exposure of standing out. Generic positioning isn't just a strategic mistake. It's often the false self making a very rational decision to stay protected. The problem is, the market operates exactly like von Restorff's experiments. Safety through resemblance is invisibility through resemblance. And invisibility, however comfortable, is not a good business strategy. There's another concept worth introducing here from social psychology called the chameleon effect. It is a documented tendency for people to unconsciously mimic the behavior, language, and positioning of those around them. In a business context, this produces markets full of competitors who have gradually converged on the same language, the same promises, and the same aesthetic, not through deliberate imitation, but through the natural human tendency to mirror what's around us. The result is an entire industry of numbers with no words among them, where the first business to say something genuinely specific doesn't just stand out, it becomes the only thing that anyone remembers. So what does it actually look like to find your word among the numbers? It starts with a different question than most positioning advice asks. Most positioning frameworks start with the market. Who is your target audience? What do they need? What are your competitors offering? And how do you differentiate on features or price or service models? Those are useful questions, but they're downstream of a far more fundamental one. What is specifically and genuinely true about you that doesn't exist in quite the same way anywhere else in your space? Not what you wish you were, not what sounds impressive, but what's actually true, even the parts that feels too specific, too niche, or too personal to lead with. Because what von Restorff's research tells us is that these things that feel too specific are almost always the ones that break the pattern. The detail that seems too personal is precisely the detail that the brain has no choice but to file separately from everything else it encountered that day. The aspect of your background, methodology, or perspective that you've been hiding because it doesn't look like what everyone else is doing. That's your word. In my case, the hidden authority we talked about in the branding video, the teaching background I'd been treating as something to move past, the Japan-based founder serving California clients, and the tech consultant who approaches automation through the lens of human identity rather than pure efficiency alone. None of these things are impressive in the conventional sense. All of them are specific in ways that nothing else in my market is. Specific is memorable. Generic is invisible. It's both that simple and that difficult at the same time. So back to that initial list. The business you actually remembered from this week. The one or two that made it through while everything else blurred together and faded away. Think about what made them stick in your memory. I'd be willing to bet it wasn't their production value. It wasn't how consistent their branding was or how polished their website was or how many followers they had. It was something more specific. Something that broke the pattern just enough that your brain had no choice but to file it separately. A point of view you hadn't heard before. A combination of things that didn't exist anywhere else. A detail specific enough to belong only to one place. That's not an accident. That's von Restorff's effect operating exactly how it always has. And the uncomfortable truth that follows from it is that if you can't remember what makes your own business different from everyone else right now, then neither can your potential clients. The goal was never to be the best business on the list. It was to be the one that doesn't look like the list at all. Generic businesses don't fail because they're bad. They disappear because they're forgettable. And forgettable in a market full of noise is the most expensive mistake that you can make.